Hello, Shamir. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Miriam. How are you? How are you doing?
I am good and I'm really looking forward to this conversation since we've been
Likewise.
collaborating a little bit on a course on leadership through facilitation. And I've seen you in workshops, and yes, I cannot wait to explore and to learn more about your craft. And before we're getting there, I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I love that question because I think if there's only one part of the show that everyone should watch, it's that, understanding everyone's journey to where they are in facilitation. So it's a beautiful question to ask because as I was reflecting on what brought me to facilitation, I think of back when I was a kid, I was a lot into public speaking, so into Toastmasters and that space. And that's very different. It's, you have the content with you, you have everything, and you're just delivering. It's one way. But then as, I started going into more into the work that I was doing around design thinking and training, it went to the trainer part of it where you're still, holding on to the content, but you are basically putting content into the participant's head. But then a lot of, what I learned very quickly was that a lot of design thinking, you cannot just put content. People need to be able to absorb it. People need to be able to make sense of it for their context. And that's where in my journey, I realized facilitation is a key aspect of it because it's not about putting in content, it's about extracting knowledge from them. You've trained
Mm.
them on this skill. Now you're helping them see where they can apply it. And you use facilitation in that sense to help them go through that journey, talk about such challenges that they're facing, where they see it applying or where they not see it applying, and help them through that process. So when I realized, oh, okay, so there's this trainer and this facilitator mindset, and if you bring them together, we have a facilitated trainer. How powerful and impactful that is! It sparked in me the opportunity to go all the way to the other side, which is the facilitation side, and explore what is in this space and what can I bring to this middle ground that I often see myself working in and operating in because of the context that I show up in a lot of my work. So that's what
Mm.
explored me into going into facilitation. And I guess when you start doing the work, people call you a facilitator, right? But until you actually understand what true facilitation is, I found it might not be worthy of that title because a lot of facilitating, like people call facilitator, sometimes show up as just as a trainer, but that's different, right? How
Hmm.
we do as a trainer facilitator. So it's for me, it was when I started calling myself was when I started understanding the difference between training, facilitation, how we can use both in the space, play around with whatever the context and situation needs at that point of time for the impact I was trying to create in those sessions, in those workshops, to make those workshops work. So
Thank you. And I love how you emphasize the knowledge part, that it's not just about transferring knowledge, but helping them to see how they can apply it and how the transformation actually happens within them because of the knowledge. And I've never heard it so explicitly. And yeah, it
yeah.
makes so much sense because if you don't understand or if you cannot help your learners how to apply it, then it's wasted knowledge.
And I think there's a specific even more this thing because it context that I was working in was bringing design thinking to organizations, and very often it's targeted as being just a skill that you can learn, go through a workshop, and do that. But that's not. I honestly think a lot of behavior of a lot of design thinking, when you actually get the work done, it is a behavioral change that happens in people. They show up to be more collaborative, to be more iterative, to be more, let's go and try and do this rather than thinking so much about it. So that behavioral change is what you're actually going for in those workshops. The tools that you show to them is just the journey that you're leading them to. And that's
Mm.
behavioral change is not something that you can do, with just through training. It is the facilitation part of it where they're able to see it for themselves, understand, reflect on it, have that reflection. Then they grow as a person who is, it's not just the knowing part of it, they're actually doing the work, but they're also being a design thinker or a facilitator, whatever you're trying to do in that session. And that's why I think I tend to be more explicit about it because, in my honest opinion, design thinking work requires us to bring in that behavioral change. Otherwise, it's just a
Mm.
skill workshop. People enjoy, they have fun. After 1 week after that, people aren't using it.
Yeah.
And what's the impact of the workshop? So
Which brings to mind that a facilitator always starts with a purpose. So if there's no purpose of learning that skill, if there's no direct application, no opportunity for behavioral change through that skill, then why learning that? And the moment that the learners see this potential, the purpose, then they're also open to really lean into it, because learning a new skill is vulnerable, is tiring, is sometimes daunting.
Yes.
So you have
Very
to
true.
get them to the space at the first place to open up to it.
Yeah. I love that what you shared, those emotion journey that participants go through, because that's where we show up as facilitators to help them process that, make sense of it, but also, like, if you talk about the context that I was working in, helping people be comfortable with ambiguity is one of a big thing in design thinking. That is something that happens through practice, through reflection, and you as a facilitator are taking them through that, seeing where the group is at that stage, because no group is the same. Some might need some more time because maybe they come from a different context where their work is very fixed. Some, if they're used to, playing with ambiguity, you're just tending to push them a little more. So as a facilitator, you need to see what's happening in the room, what's emerging. Do we need to spend more time here or not, or can we move to the next part? Right? What is that thing? And that's where the facilitator mindset is really crucial to approaching these kinds of work.
Yes. And I'm curious because the way how you describe design thinking as a behavioral shift, it's an attitude and it's a method. So when you train design thinking, how do you facilitate this behavioral shift? Or is it so ingrained in the method that it will help, or that it will occur by definition?
That's a beautiful question, because that's something that's I've been pondering on for a long time, is how do we get people to that stage where they start to be whatever it is. And that's where this framework of knowing, doing, being has started to emerge in my mind. I would say it's something I've tested, tried, understood, which is at any point, and I think this applies for a lot of things that we're learning, not just design thinking or facilitation, even music for that matter. If you want to say that there is something that you know about it, right? Some common information that you can get available online, you can find it in a place that you are easily find. Like, you do a Google search, you'll find the things about knowing, right? About facilitation, it would be okay, well, what are some starters to start it off with? What are some important things to think of as a facilitator? These common knowledge. So that's the knowing part of it, and that's easy to find in this age that we live in. It's no more about finding this knowledge; it's about the curating of that knowledge. So that's like the knowing part of it. Then there's the doing part of it, which is getting people to actually do that. And they say, you're not really a facilitator until if you've taken so many workshops. It's how many of times are you practicing what you've learned, right? That's where you start growing. So there is that doing part of it. So like, from the knowing to the doing, it's that practice that connects it, and going into the doing and practicing of it. But very often what I found is that sometimes we tend to get so stuck in the practice, we don't think of the next part, which is what I've started to call as the being part of it. And I think that being part of it is where you start to understand the facilitation methods and everything beyond what the process tells you. So you start to think of, what is this actually doing to the group dynamics in the room? What is this doing to the safety of people in the room? What is this doing to the kind of content that's being created that aligns with the purpose of this workshop that we've been doing here? And that's sort of seeing those emergence, understanding those connections, being able to react in the moment, but also understanding larger purpose, knowing when to step back, step in. These are all things that I call as the being of a facilitator. That being happens only if you have that crucial part, which is reflection, in my thought. And sometimes we get so caught up in the doing of the work, we don't take those times to pause and reflect what happened with that body of work that I did, what could be done properly about it. And that reflective part takes us to a state where we start understanding the mindset of a facilitator, or the mindset of a design thinker. And when we are tackling complex problems, because a lot of us are working with complex situations, it is that being that's really important. Because for certain jobs where there is not a lot of knowledge about it, because maybe you're the first time that's doing it, no one has documented it, that being is really critical. And I think that reflection part of it gets us to that being, and you are able to tackle complex problems. And this is a framework that's sort of been in my head. I've been trying it out. I recently got it tested with a few friends and colleagues when I went into Europe. Like, we had a session by the pool where we're talking about this. So it's something that's starting to formulate in my mind. It's something that I see emerging. But yeah, it's how I see that journey which you were talking about.
Yeah. And I can totally see it, because it's the being part that makes you aware of the group dynamics, and also the role that you as a facilitator play in it.
Mm.
Because it's so easy to follow a process and to do certain activities because they are supposed to create a sense of psychological safety, for instance.
Mhm.
But I think if you as a facilitator, if you're not manifesting it, or if you don't have the presence or the mindset to lead by example, to have this level of vulnerability, then you don't get there. So I wonder, when you say reflection, what do you mean by that? And how do you get to such a deep level of reflection that it really leads to a behavioral change in a incorporation of this facilitation being?
Yeah, I think the reflection part is tricky, because when you're at that level of vulnerability with yourself, it can be challenging. It can be like, oh wow, what I've been doing for so long. But I think it's critical for our growth, especially if you're people who want to keep doing that. How I personally do it is something that I came into contact with, and I've helped other facilitators also do, is the Johari window that we have, where you start, understanding how you show up, what are things you know about yourself, but then what are things that others may know about you that you don't know. And so that's one way to do that, is to talk to people. So I often talk to participants who have been in sessions with me, and what did they see about it? What did they learn? What was valuable for them? How did they see myself show up once the level of comfort is there with them? Or so that gives me reflection how things are happening. There are other things that you may not know about yourselves that you can just learn through experimentation, trying new stuff, seeing what it is, and giving that time to understand what actually happened there. But I think so. It's a mixture of taking time with yourself to really process what's happened, but then also speaking to people who have different perspectives. Because I think people, like in whatever scenario is happening, right? People have some understanding of it based on their context, what it is, and that's valuable to learn and to understand. And until we ask, we don't know. But as facilitators, sometimes we get it's tough to ask, because we're just sort of taking feedback, the good and the bad, and but I think it's really valuable. It gets us to that stage of being, which can be really impactful for the next body of work that we intend to do, right? So it's that growth.
And it's interesting, because to get the feedback, we first have to create the opportunity for other facilitators or friends, colleagues, to experience our way of doing. And this very often is rare and vulnerable to facilitate in front of colleagues. And it's one thing that comes to my mind, and I'm now very curious, because I'm coming out of the boot camp where we talked about facilitation signatures. So what makes us unique as facilitators? And when I think of design thinking, it's such a clear process that millions of people are repeating and doing. And you already mentioned that, yes, the mindset and the being are part of it. But with such a process, how do you bring your own facilitation signature to it?
I love that you shared that from what you've experienced and seen, it shows up as a process. And the thing about design thinking is that it is taught in such a way that it shows like it's beautiful, it fits in this process. But once you start getting to the doing of the work, right, you quickly realize that something about this process is not working. In terms of I'm seeing myself jump between stages, and that in fact is what we call the messy part of design thinking, where if you feel that, you're actually doing it right. It's very counterintuitive, because we teach it like it's supposed to be like this, but the actual work is crazy. And being okay with that is where that behavioral change is really critical, because we teach it all the knowledge around this, and then the diagrams and the frameworks that are out there show it in a very visual way that makes sense. It fits between these boxes, and we teach it also that way, because when you learn, you need to understand in those states, but when you practice, it's different, right? So that's where that
Like the
behavioral change part of it
ambiguity that
is.
you mentioned.
Yes, exactly. And for me, how I create those situations people can do that is I call this as the tagline of my life and the way I approach my work, but also maybe some future book that I write, which is called playful with purpose, because I think leveraging play can be really powerful, but also having a purpose behind that. Because a lot of us tend to bring play, but then not help participants see the purpose behind it, and then sometimes it can come off as being as a frivolous activity, which we have to be really careful of when bringing in play. So that's why I call it playful with purpose. Yes, we're doing serious work, but I also believe that we can have fun while doing it. And the reason I say have fun and get into that play mindset is so that we can try things, not worry about the outcomes, just get into the doing. Then we have those reflections to build on what we did, so that it starts being into that part of us. And that play part is really critical. And a lot of the work that I do, how I show up, whether it's the music at the start, or music in between sessions, or even certain musical cues that I bring in, or even the way I show up, infusing humor into the session, or even the design of it, using sometimes using gifs, or gifs, or even pictures, or different ways of communicating the same information, is part of the playful with purpose approach that I take to all this work, because play is really powerful for helping us understand things, especially in the context that I work in.
And when you say play, you mean getting out of a routine, looking at things from a different angle, or taking it less seriously, or applying new rules?
Yes, those parts of it. It is that play of, like, think when we are in the playground, right? Take us back to those playground days where someone tells us, oh, we have this new game that we just found out, or we just made up right now with a bunch of friends. You want to try it? And it's like, yes, let's try it. We're not worried about, oh no, does it fit with what I'm doing? Oh, do we have time for this? Or is it like, what are the rules of it? No, we just get into the doing part of it. So you're not worried about what it would fit, how the realities of it, but you're just getting into experience it, getting a deeper knowledge of it, trying to understand it before we get critical about it. Because I think a lot of our training, a lot of our education, even I would say to some extent, our universities, we teach us to get critical really fast. And it is powerful to get critical, and I honestly think that there is a time and space for it. Sometimes when we're trying to learn things, we just want to, there's a value in experiencing it and then later getting critical about it. Because if we get critical about it while experiencing it, those are two different mindsets, and there's a clash. So we're not able to fully experience it. So that play helps us experience it without worrying about how we're going to apply it, and then how they're applying it helps us later on once we do it. Look how we talk about the divergence and convergence in facilitation. It's a similar concept here, where you're diverging, experiencing a lot of it, and later on you get critical and you start converging and bringing a sense of where can we actually use this in the work that I do. So
Yes, and I can perfectly see that, because in the playing part, we don't want to be judged, because there's usually in the play, there's not a specific outcome, or there's a measurement of performance.
Yeah, no KPI there, right?
Yeah.
So really put people off. Right?
Yes. And if we would apply the critical view during the play, we suddenly censor ourselves in the play, because we suddenly have all these voices in our shoulders and in our heads, and then leaving them aside to then come back to it.
Exactly.
And still, I think it's difficult to actually then facilitate this mindset of play, because if you know that you will be critical or judged or evaluated afterwards, still will creep in to the activity.
Yeah. And that's where that being part of a facilitator, to sense when people are feeling that way, and then as a facilitator show up with either certain ways of working, or even sometimes calling out and saying, hey, no, only silly questions in this round, right? We're just looking for silly stuff. So like, how do we show up as a facilitator to encourage that mindset, to sometimes discourage it also, because a lot of play sometimes might not be useful for the work. So when I've introduced plays, people sometimes tend to go into the entire exact space where, like, let's just play, like, forget about the work that we're doing, right? Because maybe they haven't had that space to experience that, or it's just how they're feeling at that time. As a facilitator, we have to, like, bring people back and say, okay, play, yes, but with purpose, which is why I've put that, with purpose, that's there. So there is that thing that you want to keep moving people through, moving the group. So also sensing what the group is, where they're at, where they need to be for the kind of work and the session that is designed, and how we're taking them through the stage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because when you're a child, every play is purposeful because play is basically experiencing and practicing being an adult.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And yeah, and then suddenly the purposeful play is then the how do you design the invitation to play or the prompt so that it becomes purposeful and easy for the participants.
Exactly. And that can be tough to bring play into a group that is surprised why play is even part of this agenda, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, come here for a training, for a workshop on this. Why are we doing play here? What's happening? Am I in the wrong room?
And would you always call it play?
I love that word. I love that question because I find it depends on the space, how comfortable people are with it. Otherwise, we call it experimentation, or we call it, we're just going to try something out. So I get tactful about how I use the word play in certain scenarios. But other times when presenting to clients, also I mention what it is, so I help them understand it. But I think what I try to do really early on is contextualize, solidify what I mean by play when I say I'm going to be playful. So like there's the first entrance to the room. As soon as people join the meeting, if you've ever been in a meeting with me or even just a one-on-one call, you notice that there'll be a music at the start, which is somewhat like this.
It almost
Right?
sounds like
Yes.
a podcast intro that you're like on a show.
Yeah, it's a podcast intro with that jazz bit that's just perfect, way to intro. And when people join a session with music there, the first thing is like, what is happening?
Mm-hmm.
Where is this coming from? So that's when I quickly tell them, hey, you haven't left any Chrome tab on. It's not
Yes,
you,
yes,
it's
yes.
me. This is just how it is. And they're like, oh, music. And then they're hearing the music. And this is the power of like music, is that it helps us feel those emotions without even telling you. So I can get you to that happy state by doing a process, but then we're doing something. Here you're just listening and you're already in the happy space. You're smiling, you're dancing along. I have something which is a dance music as well, which I can play, which often gets people into dancing without me saying, hey, let's do a fun picture or something like that. Right? This is the dance one if you want to hear. See, this is right when the hands come out. So this is the thing that it is able to create that space without even you doing that. So I quickly do that, then start to shake up the environment or the context or the culture that they have been experiencing, to let them know that the culture of this particular workshop, this particular intervention is going to be different. So they're like, okay, this is something different. I need to be alert here and understand. Then lay it up with, well, how is it going to be different and why? Like, it's important for people to understand, why are you even playing in the first place? How does this align to the work? Right? Not just that, oh, I just want to have fun. Okay, yes, we want to have fun, but how does it align? So helping them see that in like the first 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or 1 hour, depending on how many days of workshop it is or whatever that is, or the intervention that's there. So helping people see that, and very often when you help people see how the play fits in and they're able to see it, understand it, people want to have fun. They yes to having fun. Why not? If you can tell me that you can do the work and you can make me happy, why will I say no to that? Right? That's often space that I've been doing it. But it's hard to get that balance, but also maintain it and leverage it in the right sense. So
yes, I can see that. And I love the aspect of the music because yes, music is such a beautiful co-facilitator.
yeah.
And I'm just thinking of all the baggage that participants bring into the space of, oh, we have to be professional. What will others think? Work must be difficult. Oh, we're having a serious meeting. So all these kind of beliefs.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are hindering the participants to go there.
Yeah.
And one thing that I love about play is also that it flattens the room. The moment you start playing, there's no hierarchy.
Exactly. A friend of mine, a friend and good colleague as well, he does this with rubber chicken. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later, but if there's a rubber chicken, in his words, if there's a rubber chicken on the desk, what does it say about the status there? And the thing that he says is that people in a boardroom suddenly become transformed into people sitting at a cafeteria. That's two different environments. And I guess how I represent that is through music. With his, it's music, it's this thing. So this is Adam Lawrence. So he talks about this as well.
Beautiful. The
So how
rabbit
is
chicken.
just can we shake that environment, right? How do we to bring it to that space where we want to? So a bit of shock and awe, you can say, if you want to get technical about it.
Yeah. And I wonder, so to come back to the training of design thinking, is then when you're training it, is it design thinking just an umbrella to actually train then facilitation and the facilitation mindset? Or what is the... No, let me,
I think I understand what you're trying to get at, and correct me if I'm wrong here. Because something of the spaces that I love about design thinking is that you can bring in design thinking mindsets without even using the word design thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So a very simple example of it is we're talking about collaboration here, right? So so oftentimes when I come into organizations, they may not have that time to spend on a full-on training. It will just be one workshop, like maybe a few hours. So we'd focus just on collaboration. How are you collaborating? And talk about different ways of collaborating. Whether, because a lot of times when we do collaboration, it tends to be a one pen, one page, which is one person writing on a piece of board. Hey, let's share ideas. Let's brainstorm. If you tell them there are different ways to do this, there's a way where everyone can see each other's ideas, contribute on their own. So that's one page, many pens. That's there. And then there's another one where everyone's contributing on separate pieces of paper, and can but don't look at each other's ideas. So you get diversity now, and you get detailed. So that's many pens, many pages. And I take this from This Is Service Design Doing, the book. It talks about this mindset. So sometimes we're just shaking up and telling people there are different ways of collaboration, and then they go experiment about it. So what happens is you are then in the organization creating the basis on which, the foundation on which design thinking work happens.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if there's no collaboration existing in the organization or different ways of collaboration, design thinking is not going to work. It's not going to work at all. No point of the workshop. But so sometimes it's just about helping people getting those foundation or those pillars in mind through a workshop experience without even using the word design thinking. Because sometimes in organizations, it might have been burnt. They might have had sometimes, tried out design thinking and realized it didn't work, or it was not implemented the right way. So now people are like skeptical about it. So you bring in those things so like, what is the context of the organization that you work at? How do you approach it? And you can bring in those mindsets without saying what the process is. And that's where, if you're in the doing part of the work, you understand the doing, you can understand how to bring it without talking about these things.
And what I hear is you don't even have to go always through the entire process. So you can take just the aspects of it if you really understand the process. And since it's not linear, as you you mentioned beforehand, then it's taking the few pieces that are, and then to start slowly to train the organization to actually adopt this mindset.
And you're seeding that behavioral change, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you do that workshop, and then after 2-3 months, now people are trying it out, doing that. There's that behavioral change happening. That's preparing them for using the process later on. So,
how many of your trainees are actually prepared for that? Because I can imagine. So the way how I got introduced to design thinking was back in my previous life. My boss, he read somewhere about design thinking. We were in the mid of a strategy process for the university and said, Miriam, I want you to learn design thinking. So he sent me to the course. So how many are actually prepared for this transformative course, and how many just think, just give me the method?
Yeah, that's it. So I have the benefit of working in different contexts. So when I work with people who have been through a lot of trainings where it's mostly on software or skills, then it tends to be very, okay, this is how you do it. These are some things around it. And okay, you can go ahead and apply it because it's skill-based training. Now they've come to design thinking, which is advertised to them as just being skill. Oh, it's just another skill you can learn for the workshop you can do. So that's the mindset they're coming with. But hey, I'm saying you're going to spend time with me. We're going to go through this. But even after this, you're not going to be able to understand design thing. So helping people understand that it is a longer journey. That is one part of the process, but also enabling them to create their own journeys beyond that workshop. So it is about, like, I tell people, like, I will be able to help. Like, I focus mainly on the mindsets of design thinking rather than which method you're using, because the methods will change. You can easily find the methods online these days. You can even ask ChatGPT to create the method for you. But if you don't know the being part of it, when the method applies, where it doesn't apply, then what's the point? So, like, I focus the workshops on the mindsets because that's what we can do in that time. The mindset is something you can build on your own, and then you can know how to use the tool. Because I say, the process or the thing that you're following is probably the hammer. But if you don't know how to use the hammer, right, you don't have the right mindset, then you might use it in the wrong way.
If you don't know how to identify the nails.
The nails, exactly. Where to use it and where not to.
Yeah, I love that. So I was just wondering about all the mindsets or key skills that define the being. This would also, so there's the empathy part, right? So then there's the asking questions part, seeing the world through someone else's eyes. What are the mindsets that you would then differentiate?
I think when you're talking about the being, is that right? You're talking about, I think the first thing when it comes to getting into the being of any work is to have humility. Why? Because when I think of the journey of you've known this work for so long, you've done this work for so long, we have that thing of, oh, I know this, I'm an expert in my field, right? But when you start going into the being part of it, it can be really critical about yourself. It can be getting like, oh, what have I been doing for so long? So it can get this thing very fast because you're reflecting, you're getting critical about yourself so that you can grow, and it's worthwhile. But if you don't have that humility to do it, you might not reach there because you should be like, no, I'm perfect with what I'm doing. So why do I want to go? So I think even being ready for that would be a layer of humility that comes in. That, I've known this work for so long, I might have written so many books in it or be the person that people come to for workshops, but I myself still need to know more about this. So that's why I'm getting into the being part of it, so that, and reflection part of it, and get critical about my work that I have been propagating and I've been doing and the people have been paying me for to do, just so I can grow, right? Because these are things that we shift. So I think there's the humility part of it. Then there is the humility with ourselves, the first one, and then humility with others. Showing up as people might recognize you as an expert of that, but then having conversations with people. Because I said part of it is also talking with people about it. How do you talk with people to get feedback on your work when you are in that presence of being the person for it or being known for it, right? So being able to tell people that, hey, I want to learn this aspect of myself. So the humility, not only with ourselves, but others as well. And then there's the layer of, I think, also just giving ourselves that time to do it. Because in the work that we're currently doing, or the number, you might be doing a lot of jobs around it, but if you don't give yourself that space, I find like for me, it can just leave me doing that same kind of work for a long time. And I call that might be a stagnation. And for people who are, forever learners or people who want to constantly keep improving themselves or growing or have the growth mindset, you want that growth, right? So you need to but for that, you need to give yourself time for that. So I think giving ourselves time to reflect is also a critical aspect of it. And yeah, these are what I can think of critically as well as with reflection that I already mentioned. So.
Yeah. And the humility part it's so daunting and it can go very deep very quickly. And there's so much related to it because you need to have the safe space. You need the time as a group, and you need the mindset or the trust that you can actually go there.
Exactly.
How much time do you give your learners for that?
I would say small doses. Do not want to inject them with too much of it as well. Because, but what I do is I do give them a flavor of it. So I'll share an example, a critical example, so you can understand. what I mean. So when they say about design thinking to the organization, what I have learned through my work, that just understanding design thinking is not enough, because you need to understand how it interacts with other innovation mindsets in your organization. If people are using agile, people are using lean, because people don't need design thinking. What people need is the innovation or the products or the services they're looking to create. Design thinking is how you get there, or lean is how you get there, or agile is how you get there. So you need to understand how it interacts with others, but also how it doesn't interact. You have to like take that zoomed out view, which is sort of like a systems thinking approach. But then what people are going through an organization, when you're bringing this in, there is change management as well, because now the organization is being transformed to get more customer centric, which happens over time, which happens through small interventions, yes, but you have to have the larger picture of change management that's going on. So when I started learning more into how to get design thinking on the ground running, right, inside organizations beyond just a workshop, these things come in. And then that makes you question, oh my God, how much of this design thinking do I actually know? Like, no, I don't. I need to learn about these other aspects that also support the work, the actual part of the bringing the work into the organization, so that when I show up as a person who's helping organizations do this, I have that in my head, first of all, because if you have that in your head, you can communicate with the clients, that you can help them see that journey. But also for participants who are learning to apply it, which is the critical aspect, letting them know that, that it is an organization change that is going to happen. So that means that when you go, you try this out in your organizations, you might not be allowed to do the whole process. You might maybe only be able to make a change to maybe how you do brainstorming, because this your organization is set up and you said this is how we work. We don't want to change all that drastically. So, and then telling them that that's okay. If you, even after this workshop, if you change the way that you brainstorm with your team, that is one step towards where you want to go. But helping them understand that sometimes you might have to take that small steps in time, as opposed to, what, I did a design thinking workshop, now we're going to apply it, now we're going to mess up all the processes that we currently have, because that's what Shamir said in the workshop. So, helping them see the practical side of it in the workshop is how I approach that kind of work and prepare them for that.
Which then brings in another mindset, which is this flexibility, mental flexibility, and open-mindedness. I loved what you said. I found this intriguing. How does design thinking as a method apply or does not or collide with existing innovation methods?
Yeah.
And then
spaces where you should not be using design thinking as well.
Can you give an example?
So if the work that you're doing is very defined, like what the problem is, what the solution looks like, and there's no ambiguity in the problem that you're solving, why bring design thinking? Because design thinking will slow down the process. Now, that value of slowing down is useful if the problem is ambiguous, if you're not sure about it and you are still discovering it, you're still understanding. So certain kinds of work is great for design thinking, but certain kinds of work is not. You shouldn't be using design thinking there. And if you use design thinking there, what's going to happen is that you said, okay, we went through this whole process of design thinking. We found out that what we had in the first place was just enough. And then the manager would say, then why did you spend 2 weeks on it? Why did you spend these many people's salary or time on it? You know what? Design thinking is burnt in the organization. Now we don't need it. So helping them understand where to use it, where not to use it tactfully. And it's also that intuition of knowing where not to, which is hard to get, which happens through reflection, which happens to understanding that behavioral change. So
yeah, and thank you. Also being aware of what happens if you create this perception of ownership. So through design thinking, you get the group to create a solution, a prototype, and then they get attached to it. So what happens if suddenly a group of people creates or finds ownership for a solution that actually already has a solution or has a solution, or everything is predefined? This can create a massive disruption and conflict.
And resources.
Yes,
and people who are giving that check mark, let's do design thinking sprint now, or let's spend time on design thinking. They'll be like, do we actually need it? Because we already knew this. So, it can burn the name of design thinking in an organization.
Yeah. So would you then, is the solution then that if you're working in the space of innovation, it's not enough to just have this one method, because actually you do need to know all the methods to then speak the language of the people who are in there, and also to say, okay, what other methods can we use, or how can we mix and match them?
Exactly, and exactly that you've put the nail on the head there. And for me, I think that's where not just the knowing part of the work, but the being part of the work is critical. Because when you get into the being part of the work, this is when you start to see this. This is when you start to question, oh, this is what I've been thinking so far. So then you realize these other things that are out there that you need to at least understand, see how it works or doesn't work, and start to think along those lines.
Mm.
Because if you're not thinking about it, you sell it to your client goes, uses it, 6 months after that, 1 year after that, they're going to face that out. But if you tell them at the start, you help them in the journey, you can get them through that process, right? Because you see those connections.
Yeah. And then I think, especially in the implementation of the idea, so what comes after design thinking are then the agile and the lean methods to really keep the momentum going, right? Because there's nothing more frustrating than going through a design thinking process. Then hooray, we have the prototype, and then nothing happens.
Yeah. And the whole time we spend for the workshop, like I feel the real value of if a workshop works, sorry to take the name of the thing here, but works, the idea is that, for it to work, it should be like the impact after the workshop. That's what I'm always thinking of when designing what's happening in the workshop. The before, right? So like what's happening in the organization before I even come to this, what's happening in the workshop, but then what's happening after as a result of that. Right.
Yeah.
So then that's when a workshop really works. Otherwise, you're just doing it for that moment, which isn't impactful work. Yes, you'll get paid for it, but it's not impactful work. So
yeah. Or you might have outcomes like better team communication, but it's usually then not the purpose. Back to the purpose. So what makes a workshop fail?
Wow. How long do you have?
As long as you need.
I think I think if I were to put it in, I wouldn't say one word, but a few way, because rather than saying, critical stuff, I'd rather give a mindset by which we can check the workshop fails is, I think, empathy. And I think this comes from my space in design thinking, where I leverage a lot of empathy to understand what is that journey that people are going through. And when facilitators do not do that, do not think about what are people bringing into the session, what is happening around beyond what you're training them on or whatever you're facilitating on, understanding the larger picture. So if you are not being empathetic about their situation, then it can lead to failure. So what I mean by that is not only understanding in the terms of the work, but also understanding why sometimes it's okay to have videos off. And I know this is, oh, what are you saying? In a workshop, or you're having an online workshop, it's okay to have videos off. I'll share a little bit of a story here, which is, so I have a lot of friends and colleagues who work in Europe, US, and this part of the world. And a friend of them had shared this. And when I was sharing about this, it was something around, I came along the lines of, and for them, I understand the value, like as a facilitator as well. If you want to see faces of people, it gives you so much sense of what's happening, especially when we're just confined to our upper body, right? We can't see everything else. We're just confined to this. It's important to see that. But if you do not have empathy for what people are going through, you might force it on them and they may not feel not that safe. And the reason I'm sharing this is because a lot of people in Asia or tend to live with their families or not have isolated spaces where they can have a Zoom session on. You're either sharing it or you're doing it in your living room. There are other people around. And, you have to think of these stuff when doing it. And that's when I tell people it's okay. We'll have moments in the workshop where we can turn it on, moments where we cannot. It makes it more tough for me. Yes, it definitely does as a facilitator. But then you're meeting the needs of what people are, right? And often what I found is maybe the first day of the workshop, most tend to be off. The second day, they find a way to make it work for them because you have included them in the process. What I mean by this is they put it against the wall so that, now they can put in their video. They figure this out on their own because you've given them ownership. You have respected their context because you understand it. You have worked with them to create how we're going to work together, right? As we say, the ways of working. So if we show up as, this is how the workshop should be, this is how it is, it's going to be fine because I've done this workshop many little times, and we don't think of who those people are on that specific day, on that specific workshop, it can lead to what I think is failure. And this is one example of it, the video. There are other things as well.
And I just want to pause here for a little moment because I think what you shared just shows so much what you mean by the being of the facilitator. The being part is incorporating the empathy that is part of the design thinking process. So empathy for the participant, for the user, and more than that, also the mindset of the being that, yes, I might feel uncomfortable with everyone having their cameras off because I cannot interpret their body language. So I'm deprived of that information, but it's not about me. And then trusting. And then trust is another mindset maybe of a facilitator. Trusting that the participants, by going through the process, feeling the agency and responsibility to figure it out, they become creative. Yeah. That's part of the goal of the workshop.
Exactly. Like, so there was this one in the particular workshop where this was the context, like the video is going to be on. And I said, I prepared this activity, which is basically, it's called, what am I doing? So I'll say, hey, Miriam, what are you doing? And you'll say, maybe swimming, right? And I'll move my hands like this as if I'm swimming. Then we both do it together. Then you say, hey, Shamir, what are you doing? And I say something else, jumping, and we both jump together. The idea is that, you start to embody what you're doing. The purpose behind that was, it was to help them think of prototyping. So if you think of the word, start thinking of what it looks like, right? To get them in that mindset. That's how it was used. I told them this only works. I shared this with them. This is what we're going to do. And this is why we're going to do it in this. But if all the videos are off, how can we do this? Right? So, and that's when there was an awkward silence. There always is that awkward silence, but I love to let it be because I feel it's the silence before the storm, right? And then someone unmuted and said, why can't we do this with voices? I was like, wow, I never thought of this. And then I just said, tell me more. Another voice said, okay, so what do we say? What are we doing? And then we make noises, and then everybody has to now make those noise, whatever that is. And we had different people doing this because they couldn't come on video, or not all of them. And they were doing it with the noises, and it worked out great with this noises. And I could have never thought of this. I could never have been so creative, but there was that trust that, yes, I'd leave it with you. Let's make work for us, right? Let's make this workshop work for us. And then they came up with it.
And again, it's beautiful because then it boils down to when participants understand the purpose. So you didn't do this activity as an icebreaker of, oh, we want to be silly together and I need to up the energy. No, we are doing this exercise for this reason because I want you to incorporate the mindset of prototyping. So if this is not working, how else can we make it work?
Yeah.
And if they understand the purpose, they will find a creative solution.
Exactly. And side note, I hate the word icebreaker, but we can talk about that later. But you're true and shared, yeah.
Yeah. I would love to hear what you dislike about icebreaker, and then I want to talk about leadership. Not only about design thinking, but what does facilitation mean for leadership?
Yes. So very quickly on the icebreaker part of it, and so this is my icebreaker rant starting now.
Yes, please.
So, why do I think of, so when I think icebreaker, I send to someone, what do you think of? A hammer, a picks, or this, right? That's what I think of. So what's happening? When do people say icebreaker? When you're new to the room. So you have people who are new to this space, you bring them in and you said, I'm going to have an icebreaker. What comes in my head is I'm going to bring a hammer to this group. I think there's a colleague of mine, I can't recall the name, but I think he calls it ice warmer. That's one way to do it. But also I think why icebreaker is because when facilitators, especially those who are, I don't want to say the word junior, but I would say someone who's starting off thinks of icebreaker and Googles it, you find lots of great funny activities, which has no connect to the work that you're doing. That's where the danger really is. That you're bringing people to a space, you're telling them to do an activity that's silly, but you're not telling them how it connects to work and it doesn't connect with the work. Then why are we doing this? Why are we spending time on it? Yes, you want to build connection. I understand that. But then there are activities where you can build connection and you can align it to the work and it can help you do that. So if your opener, right, that's one way of calling it, an opener or a energizer, whatever, is connected to what you're doing, it's a great way to start. It builds connection, which is what technically icebreakers are for. It's for starting people off, get comfortable with each other. And it leads you into the flow of the next work, right? So then you're thinking about the flow. So it's connected, it's value. And yes, I've brought in play there and people see the value of play. Now, if I brought in just technically what I say is an icebreaker, there's not connected to the work. I have brought in play. There's no purpose behind that. People are realize, okay, so whenever he brings play, we don't need to do this. Maybe we don't need to pass because I don't see how it aligns. So that's why I have strong feelings around Icebreaker, and that's my rant.
Yes, and I totally subscribe to that. And who comes to my mind is Jan Keck, who calls them ice melters, which I really like, because then the melting ice is also kind of represents the flow, and makes it soft and smooth and gradual. Yeah,
it's not a hammer coming at you. It's
exactly.
a nice warm feeling that you're feeling, right? You want them to feel warm.
Exactly, absolutely. Yeah. And I hope that I won't make this cut too hard. But when I hear everything how you described facilitation, despite the fact that it was attached to the method of design thinking, and the emphasis on the being, all of these attributes or characteristics that come to my mind are actually leadership characteristics.
Yes.
Yes. So how do you think, and I would think that leaders, air quotes, the traditional leaders, are not those who would sign up for a design thinking course because they're less in the operative. So where do you see the relation between facilitation and leadership, and how do we get leaders to learn facilitation?
So in my honest opinion, when I think of facilitation mindset, leadership mindsets, I think it's almost the same. I don't see a distinction, and I'll tell you why is in that space. Because when we think of facilitation, and I share this with people, that if you've been living with people and interacting with them and finding a way to work with them, you have been doing facilitation. Simple as that. Because that's what facilitation is. You're trying to make the process of working with each other or doing something together easier, whether that is booking a trip to a certain place, or that's finding a restaurant, brainstorming, finding a restaurant. You can use facilitation. That is a facilitation mindset. So understanding, but I think what makes a facilitator is when you get intentional about it. You get intentional about the space that you're creating because you understand its value. And so now you can call yourself a facilitator. I think that's the only distinction between that. And why I say this is because some people might find themselves in leadership positions having not ever experienced being a facilitator. And you can still embody those facilitation mindsets. So if you are thinking about the people in the room, what is happening with that kind of work, you're thinking of how can we collaborate in different ways? How does group dynamics work? When might we want to split people up? When might we want people who might never work together because the work requires it? It's facilitation. That is group dynamics. That is leadership also, right? So that's why leadership, facilitation, very, very, very similar, very interchangeable. Design thinking, facilitation mindsets translates very well to leadership mindsets. And what's great about facilitation is that there are so many times that when you get into the work, you realize that you can be an invisible facilitator, right? Invisible facilitator, where you don't need to be in the room. The process takes over. And that for a leader is very powerful. Because now you can, because as a leader, if you are able to create the conditions where the work happens without you being there, that's what happens in facilitation. That's so powerful on you and your time, because leaders have less time, or they need to be in different places. They need to be thinking about a lot of different things. So if you can create the conditions within your team to let that work happen without you being there, have people create that trust within the team that no matter what the situation, they realize that they will be able to work together, but also trust the process, be okay with ambiguity, and figure out a way together. That's great collaboration. That is a great team. That is great leadership. It's very similar. I interchange those words, facilitation and leadership, like that, because I see them as being so connected and being so, take one from this space, put it into this space. Because then you also think of, as a leader, when do I need to step away? We think about the hippo in the room, the highest paid person's opinion, the presence of a leader, presence of a facilitator. Just you being in the room sometimes affects, facilitator being in the room affects what's happening in the room. When might we need to step away? When might a leader need to step away from a meeting because they're not helping the outcomes of whatever that is? So I really see it as being interchangeable.
Thank you. Funny enough, what came to my mind was the analogy of sending groups or splitting a group into subgroups, sending them into a breakout room. So this is what appeared when you said letting the process facilitate and sending the teams off. And sometimes if I'm working with very small groups of 4 people, I would put all the 4 in one breakout room just for them to do that. And it seems silly. And sometimes I feel silly about it, as if I either want to get rid of them or assume that they have secrets. But I think, as you say, there is a dynamic to the facilitator being present versus being absent. And then the skill that is, translatable into a leadership skill. How do you define the instructions or create a prompt that the group can run with and make it their own?
But yeah, exactly. So it is the prompt that helps you get there. But also, as you know, as a facilitator, sometimes we want to understand what's happening in the room, which is why sometimes we enter the room and we bring in our presence. But if they're working on a Miro board, or if they're working on a Google slide deck, we can sometimes check in on the work without checking in on them, right? So that's like one facilitator mind. So as a leader, can you check in on the work without checking in on them and being critical about the work, or helping them think that they are under review? Mm-hmm. So, right, this is how I see it translating in the scenarios that you shared as well. So
yeah, and also the mindset. I mean, it depends on the organization to what extent they have managers, leaders who are really in this position that they can focus on the people management or people leadership without being in the content. But I think if they are in this luxurious position, to really trust that the knowledge is in the participants, that they bring in all the content, which is the facilitator's mindset.
Exactly. And it's so liberating as a leader, right? When you do not have to show up to the room with solutions, but you can trust that the room and the people that you're working with can come up with solutions. So you're not being a trainer here. You're not coming with the knowledge of how we're going to solve this problem. We're coming as a facilitator, knowing that we're going to spend this time together. We're going to extract the group knowledge that exists, because we trust that with the knowledge in the room and with the collaboration that exists and the minds and the safe space that we've created, we can together come up with the solutions. So as a leader, I do not have to come and know the solutions. I can trust my team to do this. Like, I create the conditions where the solutions emerges, very much as a facilitator, very much as a leader.
Yeah, I love that. And what comes to my mind is the question, where do you learn to be a leader or a team that can actually follow such a facilitative leader? Because I think that teams or individuals who have been used to being told what to do and to follow and to have this hierarchy, and suddenly they have this leader coming in who just went to your facilitation course and like, and I trust that you have all the knowledge and here are the instructions and you do. What are the pitfalls of that, and what does a team need to know to have the maturity?
I think it's first of all, why is this happening? Why is this change happening? With any change, I think it's helpful for people to see the larger picture, because then they can subscribe to it, but also they can share when it's not working for them. As a leader, as a facilitator, when you realize you're bringing this in, and maybe they're feeling this emotional thing of, you used to tell me what to do and I used to just go and execute it. Now I have to figure it out. I'm feeling scared, like what's happening? I don't know what's going on. As a facilitator, as you see that happening, as a leader, you can then take the action to create conditions where those emotions are shared, where you realize that maybe we don't go drastically to the one side. Maybe we have a collaborative session where we talk about what that work would look like, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. We're going to figure it out together. Then the next time when we do that work, you can do that on your own, or you can do that with your colleagues. So it's that step-by-step, this thing. So understanding if it's such a cultural change for that person, it has to happen in small steps. So we do that in workshops. We understand, okay, then the scope of this workshop is only so and so, and the next workshop will target this particular scope. Then as a leader, same way, you understand that the scope of maybe this project, the collaboration will look like this, but from the next project onwards, I expect you to take up more of a role in leading this. So that's how I see it happening, and that change happening over time, and how facilitation and leadership so
Thank you.
similar.
Where again the mindset, the being comes in of sensing that there is a disruption, being mindful
Exactly.
and empathetic that something is changing,
Mm-hmm.
and then not trusting in the process in this case, because it's not about the or cutting down, adjusting the process to the reality
Mm-hmm.
to meet the people
Yeah,
where they are.
exactly. Which is a very facilitator's mindset, right?
Yeah. Where do leaders learn that? So where to start with that? Because yes, it brings in the humility, and I wonder whether I wonder how to get there, because I cannot imagine, or I see only very few leaders who would sign up for a facilitation course, because it sounds so operational.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that is where the mindset is really important, because you can learn this even if it's not a facilitation workshop. If you are a person who is collaborative, you are a person who sees the value in this or prefers to work in that way, you would sort of start to embody these things and show up in a space that shows that you come with that mindset of it. I think it comes back to the same thing of what I shared earlier, which is to do design thinking or to help people do design thinking. You can even do it without sharing the word design thinking. So here you can teach the mindsets of facilitation to leaders without even using the word facilitator. Now, if you are showing up as a person who does a lot of facilitation, who, if the course is designed in such a way that it draws those parallels, then you have to use the word, you have to make those connections. But you can share it with them if their intention is, to train other people in this. You just talk about those mindsets. Talk about how can we build those mindsets. You don't have to talk about where it comes from, as long as it works for you, right?
Yeah. And they're not calling it facilitation, but leadership.
Yeah. That's why I say, like, those words are so interchangeable for me that I don't see a difference so much that it. So when you ask what's similar, what it is like facilitation, leadership, same, but different, but same. No.
Same, but different. Yes. What remains your number one facilitation challenge?
Oh, my number one facilitation challenge. So I think for me, I'm a person who, there's a bit of context I have to share about this. I'm a person who likes to keep trying new things, experimenting, building on it, and growing, learning. That often means that if I'm doing the same context of work, very similar context again, there are certain things that you would expect that it would almost be the same. But I show up in that space of, let me redesign this, let me think ahead, which means that my creation times for certain projects might be more longer than it probably should be. That's a personal thing because I like to try new things, which also can be scary for the client, because if you tell your client that we've run this multiple times, but we're still going to experiment on this. You tell a client that you're experimenting in the workshop with it, they're like, oh, what's happening? Like, no, this is supposed to be done, and this is the process how we do it, and we fix this now. Let's go ahead with it. But if you're and for me, I'm a design thinker where iteration is such a big part of it, that we want to have the small iterations, we want to bring in experiments and continuously improve it. But that word improve might mean for that particular client or that leader that the work is not there yet. That's not the case. Like when I say improve, I mean let's get to the next stage. But when they hear the word, that's they understand something very different. So this has been a challenge for me to know when to use that to help people understand that. But also I tell them that even if I've been doing this again, I'm always going to bring something new to this, something different to it, because that's how I show up. And whatever I'm charging is inclusive of that. So I'm not going to charge you for this, but my rates are basically for that particular workshop, even if I've done it multiple times. But also the adding additional stuff. It's hard to tell people that you're running this multiple times, but you still are charging for basically creating new stuff. Like, why is that happening? So but that's the way I operate. That's what I found value in. That it's not the same thing. Copy paste. No, control C, control V. It's not that. it's different contexts. You have to add stuff, move stuff. Sometimes you learn things along the way. And
Yeah.
that's the process. So that's a challenge for me, I would say.
I can see that where the client is backward looking. Okay, if you say improving, it means the last version wasn't good enough. And you're forward looking, saying, oh, but it can always be better because this is the process. That's design thinking. That's a being part of design thinking. How much work do you do, or do you apply a design thinking process on the design of your training so that you interview your participants, you do some background research?
Yeah, I do definitely do that. And what's funny is it took me a while to, the reason I giggle when you share that is it took me a while to realize that I was designing facilitation or workshop because just share the context. Like I recently, when I say recently, this was like 6-8 months back, got to start a facilitation training series for internally an organization that I was working with. And they're one of the participants, and these are design thinkers, right? So one of the participants, she shared that when she was looking at the way I was approaching facilitation and training and the teaching behind it, and she saw that I can see now how facilitation and design thinking come together because you're basically designing that moment together of it. It's like, is that what I said? Huh. So I had a conversation with her later to understand more about it. And I realized, yeah, that's how I approach it. And it makes sense because that's the context that I've been working on for a long time. So it's natural that my brain is going to infuse those two things together and bring it in, just as someone else who works in a different field and facilitation brings in a different mindset into it, which is why I think it's so valuable, this course that we're doing, right? Where we have 6 different people who are from different spaces and a common thing of facilitation. They bring in that knowledge, that value, that approach. So you're doing the same work, you may go through the same process, but that approach is different because of our context, our shared, our spaces that we come from, and the differences as well.
Yeah, which reminds me of this progress we are making from unconsciously incompetent. So we don't know what we are not knowing. This is even before your knowing stage, and then you learn on the content, and then you're getting into the doing stage and you're becoming better, and then you're consciously incompetent, and then at the end you're unconsciously competent, where you have incorporated the work so much that it becomes second nature and you don't even realize how much you apply it.
That's where the reflection part of it is so critical, because if someone shared it, it's easy to say, okay, and then move on to the next. But the reflection part of me said, hey, I want to understand what this person's coming from. And by spending time with them and understanding how she particularly saw it in that way, I was able to understand myself better. So the being part of it, right? That's what I was saying, that giving us time for that reflection, giving us space for that reflection.
Yeah, and then this reflection also always as a vehicle to practice humility, the self-humility and in front of others, where, if I understand you correctly, that at least that's how I imagine it, the reflection is always a self-reflection. So looking back and how I perceive it, but then also the reflection as of the mirroring by others.
Yeah, with others as well. So getting feedback from others, seeing how they perceived what they saw, why they saw it that way, and what they saw in you that you didn't realize. Because oftentimes we don't realize our superpowers until someone says it. Like I didn't know I was good at explaining things, complex things in an easy way until someone told me this. And that made a shift for me. And I was like, maybe I should get into training, because that's basically what it is. So people see your superpowers, you don't see it. So it's helpful to speak to people on why they see what they see, not in a way that is, I just want to glorify myself. No, I want to understand myself better. People often want to help you with that. So
yes, and true, because our superpower, I think it's who said it, that it's the unfair advantage is what we are doing so well, and it's so natural to us that we don't even realize that it doesn't come natural to everyone else.
Exactly.
And hence we cannot see it by definition because we think that it's just a normal thing to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, and funny enough, that's how I got to podcasting. Because people were telling me, Miriam, you ask interesting questions. You're a very good listener. And
do.
you want to do something about the fact that nobody understands what facilitation is. So why don't you do a podcast? I'm like, huh.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So like we find that space, and I call this like a Venn diagram of 3 circles, right? Find the space of something that you're good at, something that you enjoy doing, and something that you can get paid with. But for me, when people share that, I was like, okay, I enjoy doing this. I need to learn more about it to be able to get people to pay for it and to get good at it, and then move on to so that when you find a job that fits all 3 of the circles, it's great.
Yeah.
So you enjoy the work and
it's very easy with facilitation. And maybe that's the reason why many facilitators undercharge, because they're good at it and it feels so good.
I'm guilty of that so bad. Yeah. That's. I think that's a very interesting thing that you mentioned. We have to talk about that later. Yeah.
Yes.
We have to and I think it's also like because a lot of us facilitators work alone, and I say this because I know that I think Session Lab had done this in 2022. The report on facilitators where they talked about a lot, like high percentage. I don't remember the exact numbers, but high percentage work alone. So that's what I feel. These collaborative moments where a chance where we get to work with each other is really critical, because then we get to learn these things. People get to do this. But if a lot of facilitators are, at least people who identify themselves as facilitators, let me put it that way, are people who are working alone, then they might not see these things. So it's important to create practices where those reflections happen, or those discovery of superpowers happen, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and these opportunities where we can collaborate and then sharpen our facilitation signatures or identities. And that's what I find so fascinating about our collaboration on the course, that we're 6 facilitators all in the same community. And I think you through co-designing a module together, I think the impact on the opportunities you create for the learner, but also for yourself.
Exactly.
Are just incredible. And I wonder why it is that facilitators don't collaborate more.
I've been thinking about this. I would say this is not a very formed idea. I think it's a mix of sometimes it's very hard for clients to justify having 2 people in the room. So I had this very recently where a client wanted to have this big change, cultural change, and they wanted to do it for 30 to 40 people. And I told them I need a second facilitator, because people at my competition obviously was doing this on their own, and obviously the charge was different because 2 people versus 1. But I was saying you need 1 person to see what's happening in the room and 1 person to lead the conversation or lead the session. Especially when you have so much of a group, and you need that extra set of ears to walk around the room and see what's happening. And then so 1 person focuses on the process, 1 person focuses on what's happening in the room. So this was something that, so I think there's an element of clients not seeing the value of having 2 people in the room. I think there's also maybe an element of sometimes, so as a result of that, people do not get a lot of opportunities to do that. And I think facilitators, I don't want to say facilitators are controlling. That would be really bad to say.
There are many of us who are, and I'm guilty.
Yeah. I think it takes a lot of effort. I would put it that way. Like, it takes a lot of effort. Now, if I've created this work process for myself, it takes more effort for me to explain that to you, to work with you, and then co-create it together, which is really bad to say, because that's essentially what facilitation is, right? So this is, us as facilitators not practicing what we are preaching.
Yes.
But it's actually hard to do if you're doing it for not in a long term. Now, if you have a working relationship, we work together. Okay, we've built that together. So it is tough to do it when it's just a small project. But the value is so much that I force myself to have a lot of collaborative sessions in a year. Like, I do this intentionally, whether it's a paid session, whether it's an unpaid session. Most of them tend to be for IAF, whether it's the conference that's upcoming or whatever. Let's get myself into situations where I'm working with people who I haven't worked with before, just because it helps you learn so much more about yourself, but also learn so much more what other people are doing.
Yeah.
How are they doing it in that space? So I think there's that element also, that we're not used to doing it, maybe because the work doesn't allow it, or clients don't see the value of it, whatever in that case. Or I've seen sometimes people undercharge for each facilitator just to manage that, so that they can have two people in the room. So it's tricky.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
I wish we had more chances to collaborate with.
What comes to what I hear and what you say is, I think facilitators, we can learn to have better arguments when it comes to negotiating with our clients, because I think, yes, one is there for the process and one is there for sensing the room. I can also see how one is there to listen to the words and one who's there to listen what remains unsaid.
Exactly.
And I think if we can help our clients understand why it's important, and then maybe we're just undercharging full stop, because if we're charging low fees, then the stakes for them are not so high, so they don't have as much skin in the game. So if whether it works or it fails doesn't matter, but if the stakes are higher and we tell them, okay, so we do need someone else, because otherwise we won't get to the results you need.
Exactly.
Then also it's a lower increase percentage-wise.
It's challenging also, right? How do you explain this to a client who themselves might not share the same view of facilitation as you do? There's a number of times I jump into a space and essentially, like people who are trainers call themselves facilitators. People who are facilitators call themselves facilitators. So there's no shared understanding in the world out there, but what facilitation really is, which is why I really love the work that you're doing here with this podcast, right? People can understand about what facilitation is. I love the work that IAF is doing, National Association of Facilitators, where they're trying to spread the message of what facilitation really is to people who might be hearing this for the first time. Because unless people understand what the work is, you will find yourselves, and at least I personally find myself, explaining to people what I mean when I say facilitation. That often means that then I'd have to not use the word facilitation or use the same language that they are using to help do the work. But it'd be so much easier if people have that shared understanding. They see the value of it. So then you're not telling them the value of it. They understand the value of it, and then it puts us in a better space to explain why we need to do that, to do the work that we want to do, to align with the outcome that you're employing us for.
Yes. And the next stage is that unless you have experienced it, it's difficult to understand, even if you explain.
Exactly.
So I'm still surprised from time to time how little first-hand experience there is of facilitated collaborative process, or even non-collaborative group conversations in organizations. So there's still lots of work to do.
So this was a very specific instance, but I had someone say, isn't it just like emceeing facilitation? Like, the master of ceremonies that you have at an event. And that hit me in the heart. I was like, it's not what we do. But I can see why you see that, because I'm there standing in the room talking to you all and, doing this. So it's not the same, but so there is that space that we can probably make for more understanding of what we mean when we say facilitation to others who haven't experienced it.
Yes, and I think that's where also the problem comes in, that with the humility, which is super great, but we trust that the group has the knowledge. We have the humility not to take up too much space. We do design sessions so that they're seamless and smooth, so that at the end, the group has the impression that, oh, that was effortless. Why did we hire you in the first place? You didn't say a word. And then we wonder why they not want to pay us. So
that's so critical, right? If we do our work great, then they'll be like, why do we need you in the room?
Yes.
Like, if our work is great, it leads us to that.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 that we need to work on that.
I love that.
And then maybe to close on a hopeful note, I believe that if more than leaders understand or learn the skill of facilitation, and experience that their teams, organizations can get to results without being them being present, so them being the invisible facilitators, then they also are willing to invest more in facilitation for their high stakes sessions.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
Yeah. I think that's the mission or plan that we have. I think you with the work that you're doing, myself with the work that I'm doing, and I think the work we're doing together as well, to get that message out there. What is facilitation? But also, the definition of what is facilitation depends on the different kinds of work that people are doing. Just look at the podcast list that you have, right? If you listen to different things, you'll be like, okay, facilitation is this, but it's also this. Or it can be this as well. It can be also this. Wow, what is going on here?
Yeah, it's true. And facilitation is also leadership.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time,
pleasure.
Insights.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Miriam. It's been beautiful.
Dum, 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 dum.